There is a name that built empires, funded hospitals, trained armies of entrepreneurs, and changed the face of Black America forever. And you have probably never heard it. That woman is Annie Minerva Turnbow Malone. And the fact that you are only hearing about her now is not an accident. It is a pattern. And by the end of this, you will understand exactly what that pattern cost us. Before we drift deeper into tonight's tale, tell me, what place are you joining from? If this narration comforts you, you're welcome to subscribe and stay with us. August 9th, 1869, Metropolis, Illinois. The Civil War had just ended 4 years earlier. The wounds were still raw. The ink on emancipation was barely dry. Black Americans were navigating a country that had just been forced to acknowledge their humanity, but had no real intention of honoring it. Into this world, Annie Turnbow was born, the 10th of 11 children. Her parents, Robert and Isabella Turnbow, died while Annie was still very young, and she was raised by her older sister in Peoria, Illinois. She was not supposed to be remarkable. By every standard that the world applied to Black girls in post-Civil War America, she was supposed to survive, not thrive. She was supposed to endure, not innovate. But something happened to Annie in those early years that no amount of poverty or grief could kill. She became obsessed with chemistry, specifically with the science of hair. She noticed something that Black women around her were suffering through every single day, and nobody was talking about it. The hair products available at the time were not made for them. They were often made with harsh chemicals that caused breakage, scalp damage, and hair loss. Black women were using goose fat, heavy grease, and a mixture of whatever they could find, and their hair was paying the price. Annie saw a problem that everyone had accepted as normal, and she refused to accept it. By the time Annie was in her early 20s, she had already begun experimenting. She studied everything she could find about chemistry, hair biology, and herbal remedies, without a formal laboratory, without a university degree, without funding. Just her mind, her determination, and an understanding that Black women deserved better. She developed a line of hair care products specifically formulated for Black women's hair texture. She called it the Wonderful Hair Grower. And it worked. Not because of magic, because of science, research, and genuine care for the people she was creating it for. By 1900, she had begun selling her products door to door in Lovejoy, Illinois. She would walk up to homes, knock on doors, and offer to demonstrate her products on the spot. She did not just sell, she educated. She explained the chemistry. She taught women how to care for their hair with the intention and knowledge it deserved. Word spread quickly because results do not need advertising. They speak. In 1902, Annie Turnbow moved to St. Louis, Missouri. And St. Louis was a different kind of stage. This was a city with a significant and growing Black population, a city that was preparing to host the 1904 World's Fair, a city full of ambition and energy and people hungry for something better. Annie arrived and got to work immediately. She began training agents, women who would sell her products and earn their own income in the process. She was not just building a business, she was building a model, a system where Black women could achieve financial independence at a time when that concept was radical. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Among the women Annie hired and trained in St. Louis was a washerwoman named Sarah Breedlove. Annie took her in, taught her the products, taught her the business, gave her the foundation. Sarah Breedlove would later change her name. She would become Madam C.J. Walker. The woman the entire world knows as the first Black female self-made millionaire in American history learned her craft directly from Annie Malone. And yet, when the history books were written, Annie's name was nowhere near the top of the page. We will come back to that. Annie Turnbow married Aaron Malone in 1914, and she took his name. But make no mistake, the empire she was building was entirely her own vision. In 1917, she opened Poro College in St. Louis, and calling it a beauty school would be like calling the Smithsonian a storage room. Poro College was a full city block. It had a factory, a chapel, a theater, a roof garden, a dining room that could seat hundreds, dormitories, offices, and classrooms. It was a destination, an institution, a symbol of what Black excellence looked like when it was given the space to breathe. The name Poro came from a West African word meaning physical and spiritual growth. Annie was not just selling shampoo. She was building culture. She was connecting Black Americans to something deeper than commerce. At its peak, Poro College was training women from across the United States, the Caribbean, and parts of Africa. The campus became a gathering point for Black leaders, intellectuals, and activists. Booker T. Washington visited. Community events were held there. It was alive in a way that only institutions built with genuine love can be. And the business itself was staggering. By the early 1920s, Annie Malone was employing over 75,000 agents across the country and internationally. 75,000 people earning income, building lives, feeding families, all because of a woman in St. Louis who refused to accept that the status quo was good enough. By the early 1920s, Annie Malone's personal fortune was estimated at $14 million. $14 million in the 1920s. When adjusted for inflation and economic weight, some historians place that figure at over $100 million in today's money. She was, by almost every measure, one of the wealthiest women in America. Not one of the wealthiest Black women, one of the wealthiest women, full stop. She owned property across St. Louis. She had a national distribution network. She had an internationally recognized brand. She had a campus that functioned like a small city. And she gave it away. Not carelessly, intentionally. She donated to the St. Louis Colored Orphans Home so consistently and so generously that it was eventually renamed the Annie Malone Children's Home, which still exists today. She contributed major funding to Howard University's medical school. She gave to the YMCA. She gave to churches, civil rights organizations, and individual families who needed help. She understood something that took many wealthy people generations to learn, that wealth is only meaningful if it builds something that outlasts you. Now here is where it gets complicated and dark. In 1927, Aaron Malone filed for divorce, and he did not go quietly. He claimed that he had been the real driving force behind Poro College, that he deserved half of everything, that Annie's empire was in part his creation. The legal battle was brutal. It played out publicly. It dragged Annie's name and her business through proceedings that cost her enormous amounts of money, time, and energy. Black America largely rallied around her. Leaders like Mary McLeod Bethune came to her defense publicly and vocally, and ultimately she won. The court sided with Annie. But winning that battle cost her in ways that a verdict cannot fix. The legal fees, the distraction, the damage to the business while she was fighting for it instead of growing it. The emotional toll of watching someone try to dismantle what you built with your own hands and your own mind. She survived it, but the empire was never quite the same. After the divorce, Annie made a decision that many people in her position would never have had the courage to make. She started over. In 1930, she relocated Poro College to Chicago. She purchased a city block on South Parkway, which is now known as Martin Luther King Drive, and she rebuilt. New facilities, new energy, a new chapter. Chicago's Black community embraced her. The South Side was a center of Black cultural and economic life during that era, and Poro College fit right in. The business continued to operate, students continued to train, products continued to sell. But the world was changing around her in ways that would prove impossible to outrun. The community in the country. Businesses that had taken decades to build collapsed in months. Discretionary spending evaporated. The economics of beauty, always one of the more resilient industries, were not immune. And then there was the tax problem. This is where it gets painful. By the 1940s, Annie Malone was facing serious tax debt. The IRS came after her for back taxes owed on her personal and business finances. The numbers were significant. And rather than having the kind of legal and financial infrastructure around her that a business of her scale deserved, she was largely navigating it alone. Property was seized, assets were liquidated. The woman who had once been worth over $14 million watched pieces of her empire disappear through legal proceedings that felt, to many who witnessed it, deeply unjust. The Chicago campus was eventually lost. The distribution network contracted. The name that had once been synonymous with Black excellence and economic power began to fade from the national conversation. Annie Malone died on May 10, 1957, at Providence Hospital in Chicago. She was 87 years old, and she died having outlived her own fame by decades. In the years that followed, the name Madam C.J. Walker would become one of the most celebrated in Black history. Books would be written, documentaries would be made, a Netflix series would bring her story to a global audience, and all of that recognition is deserved. Madam Walker was extraordinary. Her drive, her vision, her brand, her advocacy, remarkable. But here is the part that history keeps leaving out. Walker died in 1919. Malone lived until 1957. Walker's peak fortune is estimated at around $1 million. Malone's was 14 times that. Walker trained under Malone. Malone built the foundation on which Walker and dozens of other entrepreneurs stood. So why does one name fill auditoriums and the other barely register? There is no clean or comfortable answer to that question. Some point to the legal battles that damaged Annie's public image. Some point to the fact that Walker was a more aggressive self-promoter. Some point to the painful tendency of history to simplify complex stories into single heroes rather than honoring the full ecosystem of genius that usually surrounds any breakthrough. And some simply sit with the discomfort of knowing that a Black woman could build one of the largest enterprises in American history and still be erased from the story of it. The Annie Malone Children's Home in St. Louis is still operating today. It has served thousands of children and families across more than a century of continuous operation. That is Annie Malone's fingerprint on the world, a living institution. Children being cared for because she cared first. Howard University's medical school, one of the premier institutions training Black doctors in America, carries in its walls the investments she made when investing in Black education was an act of defiance. The 75,000 agents she trained represent a lineage of Black female entrepreneurs that stretches across generations. Women who learned through Poro that they could own their own income, build their own client base, and answer to no one but themselves. That idea did not die with Annie, it reproduced. And the products, The formulas she developed in a time when nobody was developing anything for Black women's hair, those formulas were the beginning of an entire industry that today generates billions of dollars annually. Annie Malone built something that outlasted her. She just never got to see it celebrated. We live in a moment where there is growing recognition that history has not always told the full truth, that the people credited with breakthroughs are not always the people who made them possible, that the first person to be celebrated is not always the first person who did the work. Annie Malone's story is not just a corrective footnote, it is a lens. It shows us what Black women were capable of building even when every system in the country was designed to stop them. It shows us what visionary philanthropy looks like when it comes from someone who understands the community from the inside. It shows us what happens when legal and financial structures fail to protect the people who built real wealth without institutional support. And it challenges all of us to look more carefully at the names history did not choose to remember. Because the absence of a name from the history books is not proof that the person did not matter. Sometimes it is proof of exactly the opposite. Annie Minerva Turnbow Malone mattered. She mattered enormously, and the world she helped build is still standing, even if it forgot to write her name on the door. Now you know it. Say it. Share it. Make sure it echoes. Thank you for watching this story. I hope you found it insightful. Feel free to leave a comment if there's a story you'd like us to explore next. And if you haven't already, subscribe and enable notifications to stay connected. Until the next tale, thank you.